All right, so in our last video, we looked at using state, which is again data that lives inside of our component. We looked at props, which is data that gets passed into our component, right? So from someplace else, the props is where it moves from a parent to child, and state is something that just kind of lives inside of itself. Both of which are really important, and the way that they get handled varies a little bit. Again, we're going to get a lot more practice with this before we're done. That will make a lot more sense. In this video, we're going to use what's called a reference, okay? And you might think that a reference and state are very similar. Again, the hooks, if you can learn all the hooks, not even all of them, just learn the kind of the really core 4 or 5 hooks, even the core 3 that React uses. You get a really good grasp on those. Lots of stuff will make very good sense to you. We're going to look at 2 of these in this video. We're not using useEffect yet. We'll do that in kind of our next lecture series. But for right now, we're going to use state and we're going to use ref. They do similar things. Use state is used specifically for sort of primitives, right? So strings, numbers, booleans, arrays. Even arrays aren't really a primitive, but they're used for kind of basic pieces of data. And I think you can even use some slightly more complex ones if you want to. But usually if you're saying, I just need a variable, basically, that I want to be to change in my JSX, you're going to use state. Use ref is going to be used to get an entire element of our HTML, right? So in our case, we're going to be looking at how do we get the input and use the value from our input, right? How do I target that and pull that out of the HTML and then use that in my JavaScript, and so that I can process that and spit it back out or use it in other places. That's what we're going to be doing in today's in this lecture. You probably aren't watching them all at once, or you're probably not watching them one in a day. But anyways, let's go ahead and get started. So first thing first, again, use ref is going to be another hook. So we're going to say use ref. Again, our hooks are inside of these curly braces. And what we're going to do is underneath our use state, what we're going to end up using is going to be const add ref. And again, so use state is kind of the only one that uses this kind of syntax. I think useEffect does too, but we're not using that in today's lecture. So we're going to say use ref. And so add ref is going to use this use ref function. This is a little bit odd syntax, but again, we want to be able to, it helps clean things up, is essentially why we're doing this. We're going to come down here to input, and in JSX, ref is actually a default. So we just say, oh, ref, great, right? And we're going to automatically set this to, I believe, add ref. Add ref. And so what we're able to do is this ref will end up taking whatever gets put into the input and kind of holding it on in add ref. And then later we can use add ref.current.value to pull that information back out. So that's what we're going to be working on here. So let's go and find our add to do. And again, I'm not totally sure why I have the event here, but that's fine. So we're going to come back, and instead of passing in task, we're actually going to pull this from the ref. So we're going to, on our next line, we're going to say const task name equals add ref.current.value, right? And then we're going to say, from here we could say task name, and this should be fine. But what I want to do is I want to actually set this up as a callback. And so we're going to say old to-dos, and this might seem odd. And in fact, if it feels odd, that's totally fine. Because what's maybe not obvious to you is some of this has to do with how set to-dos works under the hood. So we can say old to-dos. Great. So what this is taking is this is going to say, hey, set to-dos. You already are aware of all the other to-dos. Instead of deleting them, we're going to return an array that's a copy of the old to-dos, and then our new to-do item here. And I don't know where that's coming from, so that's fine. That needs to go after that. Like that. There we go. So then that'll work. And so what's happening here, so this add ref.current.value, and we don't need this task anymore either, so we're just going to call this event, and that should be fine. So this is part of just how events work with JavaScript too. But we've got addref.current.value. Let's not stress about that too much. It's just believe me for right now. But task name, we've got addref.current.value. And so this is going to go to the addref. Now the actual addref itself is a hook, and it has it ends up being an object, and it's got two things in it. It's got the current, which is mutable, and so that's a value that we can kind of overwrite and change. And it's also got something called value, so you could have addref.value. That's not going to be useful to us right now. And part of this is you probably haven't worked with a language that has pointers, but basically what's happening is when we set up this ref, it's saying, hey, rather than the value itself, I want to point to the location of the value, so that then if that value changes, you can still call the same thing, still call task name, even if the value here changes. And at the end of that process, we'll be able to say, hey, what's at this value, right? What is the value of addref right now? And addref will say, here's my current value, and we'll be able to take that, save it, and then pass it in to our set to dos function. And we don't want that to happen until we select the add to do button, right? Until we click on it. Okay, and so I think that's actually everything I need for that button. Yes, it is. Great. So we should be able to now have everything we need in order to add to it. One other thing that I would like to do is make sure that we can't add an empty task, right? And so I'm going to put this little section of code into and let me just move all that forward. There we go. That makes more sense to me. But we're going to put this chunk, the set to dos code, into an if statement. And so what we'll have is we're going to have if task name. And so this is just going to say, hey, is there anything in there? Because if there's not anything in there, then I don't really want to change anything, right? There we go. Because I don't want to add like an empty task. I want to have something in. I want to have something in each task, kind of regardless. So let's just make sure that there is actually a valid value there, and then if there is, then we can actually add that to our to-dos. And otherwise, we're not worried about it. And then the last thing I want to do here is, again, if we are adding something to the to-dos, I want to say that addref.current.value equals null. Okay, and what this will do is this will just set it back to nothing so that we don't keep adding the same thing. And that's fine. And if there's not anything else, then we're going to return null, and that will clear things out. So then we got our console log here at the end. Let's go ahead and start playing around with this. So again, let's refresh the page. We're starting out with two default items. And so I should be able to say eat veggies and add that. And so that did not add this here. The log didn't work just yet, but we now have three things, right? And it also cleared out our ref, which is really nice. So then I could say, walk the dog and add that. And sure enough, we've gotten add veggies added, and this is counting walk the dog. And so I'm not entirely sure why the console log is being wonky. I think it has to do with callbacks and moving data around and stuff like that. But that's pretty much what's going on there. So now we're pretty much done. I'm going to get rid of this because that's fine. And ultimately what we're going to be doing is using the to-dos to display those to-dos inside our JSX, and that will end up showing that. So what actually we can do is, let's just do a div here. We're just going to put in to-dos like that. This will not look very pretty, but when I refresh the page, what are we mad about? Object extra not valid as a React child object. Okay, so that's not going to work that way just because of the way that works. But we're going to use this with to-do list, and we're going to use a component to actually display things, and that should play out fine. And we're going to leave this dummy data in here just for right now, just so that we can see things as we start using them. But we're getting closer. We're getting closer. We got a couple other functions we're going to end up writing, but we're grooving along, okay? So our add to do, what we do know that is for sure is thus far we are in fact successfully adding to-dos to the list of to-dos, right? Where we're able to add new things to this using the set state or the use state hook. Yep. And our use ref is going to get information back. It's going to pull back. And really when we're using that add ref thing, that use ref, it's pulling back this entire input, right? So we could theoretically get back the input as well. I believe that's what the value is that's an input now. But we don't need that part. So what we want is the current value of whatever's being fed into input. And that's what we're going to end up setting here. So use ref and use state, that's a little bit about how both of those work. And again, getting confident and comfortable with those is a really important part of using React. And then props is kind of the other really big one that I want you to understand out of this lecture. So let's go ahead and start working on our to-do list. I think everything else right now is pretty much where we want it. Eventually we're going to add styling, but for right now this is all just fine. And so that's groovy. So let's go ahead and take a look at our to-do list component. And so far we're getting passed in to-dos. Well, eventually we're going to get more passed in, but for right now that's just fine. And what we want to do is we want to take our list of to-dos, right, each of these things, and we're going to loop over them and create a new component for each one of those to-dos, right? And to do that, we're actually going to make another component. So we've got a component inside a component inside a component. If you're keeping track, there's 3 levels of this at this point in time, plus the index.js that's hosting all of that. So what we'll be doing here, and we don't actually even need to return any divs or anything else. What we're going to do is we're actually just going to return a map function. And so what we'll have here is we're going to return, we're going to say todos.map, and we're going to say for each to do, what do I want to do? I want to return a new component called data loop, which we're going to make in a second. We're going to say key, we're not going to mess with the key yet. We're going to mess with to do equals to do, and we're going to close that off, I believe. And we need to actually make that thing because now it's mad. It says it's not defined. Okay, that's fine. So we're going to say data loop.js rfc. Click on it or press enter. And what we want to put in here, this is pretty straightforward. I'm just going to copy this and we're going to talk through it. There we go. So we haven't made this yet, so we're not going to do that quite. And what we need to take in here is a to-do. And so we're passing each to-do. What we're doing is, and again, this might be a little bit complex, but again, we've worked with map functions in JavaScript, if you've been with me for my JavaScript course. Okay, a map function is going to do some function for everything. So for each to-do in to-dos, apply a function to it. In this case, the function is returning this piece of code, this component with the to-do passed in. And so we're going to be able to go here, and each component that we're going to be returning there, we're going to take the to-do. We're not going to worry about any of this yet. And label, that's fine. And so we're going to have an input with a type checkbox. So we're going to have a little checkbox on the side there. And it's going to have whether or not that to-do is complete. Again, we're pulling this, each to-do, all the way from app. So again, we're passing in our whole set of to-dos in here. And then from there, we take them. Okay, so we take our to-dos. And for each one of those to-dos, inside of our to-dos, we're going to return this whole thing. Again, passing that in as props. And you get all the way down here, and that's where we're finally going to access whether or not that to-do is in fact complete. And then we're going to access the to-do.name, and that should be good to go. So now one other thing we have to do is actually import this data loop. So we're going to say import data loop from data loop. And now it should work. And if we come back over here and refresh, it's still mad. So todos.map is not a function. Why would you think that's not a function? That is, of course, it's a function. You're being grouchy, and I'm not sure why. It pleases me very little that you are being this way. Do I have to do this for real? Hey, there we go. All right, so And so now we've got these two things here. And so, and what's throwing me is that why do we not have the name on these? To do .NET. Oh, it's because I still got to do this. Hold on. So it did actually successfully create the stuff for both of those. There we go. So now we got create. We got eat breakfast and put on shoes, and we can check those off or not. And then, you know, you can say walk the dog, add item, and it adds it right there. You know, call your mother, and you put that in there. And so that's very nice, right? Now we can't delete these, right? Nothing happens when we do this. Destroy them all. Okay, still nothing happening there, but we're able to add, and that's already really cool. And you'll notice that if we go to our components here, we've got our whole app as the whole thing. We've got our to-do list, okay? I'm not sure why that's mad. Good, excellent. We're gonna talk about that in a second too. What did I click on? So we're gonna talk about the errors in just a moment, and that's why it's grouchy. But then we've got 4 of these data loops, and each data loop is that piece of data. So this is, again, a really cool way to kind of understand how our app is put together, what's going on there. Last thing we're gonna do here is we're gonna take care of these errors, and then we're going to figure out, in the next video, we're gonna figure out these checkboxes and how to fix those, because nothing's changing here, right? Nothing is changing. We should see some state or some data changes going on there. But let's talk about this error. So let's go, we can actually go back to our console and it'll tell us. So it says, warning, each child in a list should have a unique key prop. See React.js link warning keys for more information. And so what's happening here is the DOM, the thing that this whole thing is kind of built off of, the document object model. Each node, each child component, each child node should have its own key, and that needs to be unique. And that's because the DOM needs to keep track of all the stuff that's happening at any given time. And in this case, if we were to delete walk the dog, the DOM would either keep remembering that for like forever, or the DOM would be confused and it might try and access that later and cause errors because that's been deleted, or whatever, right? Obviously, something would be wrong with that. And so we need the ID of that thing so that the DOM can keep track of, oh, this is no longer part of the process here, and I'm not going to cause errors when it's not going to break the DOM, basically, is what's happening here. So these need their unique IDs so that the DOM can keep track of each one of them. And so usually we'll have the DOM will take care of a lot of this stuff. But if we're putting it in a list, each child in a list should have a unique key prop. So that's what we're going to do next. Let's go ahead and figure this out. So we're going to go back to, actually all the way back up to app.js. And what we're going to do is we're going to get something called UUID. UUID. We can actually just Google UUID real quick. I believe we have to npm install it. Yep. So look at this. Universally unique identifier. And we're going to use a slightly older version of this. So we're going to use, v4. So this is actually how we're going to be, oh, look at that. It's actually, okay, whatever. We're going to be basically using this. We need to install UUID, and that will get added to our node modules thing. And then we're going to use the ES6 module syntax, import v4 from UUID, and then we can use it like this, and it will generate some universally unique piece. It's a string, and that's super duper. So that's what we're going to end up using. So let's go back to here, and we can leave this running if we want to. I restarted my computer and it's a lot happier, so we can npm install UUID. That was what it was, right? Yeah, just UUID. So I'm gonna press enter, and it might take a second, but it shouldn't take too long. It's not that big of a tool. Great. By the way, when we see stuff like this, yours might even be different than mine. That has to do with the version of React that we're using. One of the big headaches of using React is that sometimes the really important tools and stuff were made by like a 16-year-old, and they went off to college and they stopped maintaining the tool. Or React updates and nobody else's tools have updated to use the new version of React, things like that. So versioning is kind of a headache with React. One of the things that I hope to do with this course is give you a bit of confidence with that. But really the best way to get confidence with that is to kind of suffer through it yourself and start figuring that out on your own. But so now we have that installed, and so we should be able to come up here and say import, the same thing that we had on that other page in the documentation. V4 as UID v4 from, oops, UUID. And so that's there. Groovy, great, super. And so now we're able to use that in our code. And so what we'll end up doing is actually on our add to-dos, instead of our old to-dos like this, what we're going to end up putting in here is ID, and we're going to set this to UUID v4, and that's a function. And we'll just do it like that. So what this is going to do is it's going to generate a new ID for each of our to-dos. And we're actually going to end up, now we're going to finally delete our dummy data here. So now use state is just going to be an empty array because we're going to end up adding things to that array. But now we're going to have each of those is going to have a unique ID. I've also seen people do things like, we say old to-dos.length +1. And that's also fine. That's actually how I did it in my Vue project. But the downside with that is that if you end up deleting something in the middle, right? So your first ID is going to be 1, your next ID is going to be 2, your next ID is going to be 3, and then I delete 2. Now your IDs that are left are 1 and 3, and your next ID is also going to be 3. And again, the DOM is not going to be very excited about that. So the UUID4, this is the professional way with your nice little bow tie. This is going to be the best way to create those unique IDs for each of these. And we do have one other thing. So now we've made these IDs, we have to use them, right? So we're passing our to-dos down to to-do list. Now we have to go through all the way down the rabbit hole and actually start to utilize those. So we're going to take the data loop, and for the to-do, we're going to actually add another piece of props, and this is going to be key equals to-do.id. And that should work out just fine. Again, our to-dos are coming in. We are going over each to-do, and for each to-do, we're going to pull the ID and set that to the key, and that should be sufficient. I don't think we actually need to utilize that key inside of here at all. Nope, that should all be good. So now we should be able to, I'm going to close this terminal. So I got that. This is still here. It's happy. And now I should be able to go back here, refresh the page, and eat breakfast, add item, and it's not mad, right? So walk the dog, put on shoes. Hopefully you put on shoes before you walk the dog. But you notice that there's nothing mad here. You go to our components and our to-do list is happy. And you can see that it's displaying each of the keys here. So the props that it's getting each to do is giving an ID. We can actually drop this down. There's the actual ID itself, whether it's completed, and the name itself. So pretty great. We can see where it's getting rendered by, who is actually generating it. So it's app and to-do list. And then at the top of that is create root and our version of React. Very cool tool, and that tells us what's going on. Obviously, this is still not something that's being tracked. We need to be able to access the to-dos is completed attribute and change that. But that's a little bit more of an ornate process. That's what we're going to do in the next video. Pretty exciting, pretty cool stuff. We're actually starting to make an app that starts to actually do some things. It's pretty exciting. So hopefully this is all making sense to you still so far, and I'll see you in the next video.